A single soldier lies behind a rifle longer than his torso. The weapon weighs as much as a loaded rucksack. It fires a round originally designed for a vehicle-mounted heavy machine gun. And it was not built by a defense contractor, a government weapons program, or a military engineer with a classified budget. Most people assume the Barrett M82 came out of some Cold War black program, a military requirement that eventually filtered down to the civilian market. That assumption has the story exactly backwards. The M82 started with a civilian who had no engineering degree, no government contract, and no army asking him for anything. What he built anyway changed how militaries think about range, about anti-materiel doctrine, and about what a single soldier can reasonably be expected to do at distance. Ronnie Barrett was a photographer, not a gunsmith, not a defense engineer, not a former special operations soldier with weapons experience. He was a commercial photographer in Tennessee who became fascinated with the idea of a man-portable rifle chambered in 50 BMG, the same cartridge the M2 Browning heavy machine gun had been firing from vehicles and tripods since 1918. Barrett wanted one. There was no such thing, so he decided to build it himself, in a metal shop, with no institutional backing, no military contract, and no guarantee that anyone would ever buy it. The first prototype came together in 1982. It was rough. It was enormous. It looked like something a determined amateur had assembled because no professional had bothered, and every serious military evaluator who looked at it said some version of the same thing. Interesting, but not for us. That rejection was not random or bureaucratic laziness. It came from a logic that made complete sense inside military doctrine at the time. Armies already had the M2 Browning for heavy suppression and anti-materiel work. They had dedicated precision rifles for long-range anti-personnel engagements. The infantry toolkit, on paper, covered the ranges and targets that mattered. In the framework that existed, there was no clearly defined role for a man-portable semi-automatic rifle that fired machine gun ammunition. The weight alone was a serious logistics concern. The ammunition was a supply chain problem. And the core capability, destroying equipment at long range with a single unsupported soldier, did not map onto any mission that a military planner had formally written into doctrine. The gap Barrett was trying to fill did not officially exist, because no one had named it yet. That is not the same as it not existing. The gap was real. The M2 Browning could destroy equipment at range, but it required a vehicle, a mount, or at minimum a crew to move and operate it. Standard sniper rifles could reach out with genuine precision, but the round they fired was optimized for personnel, not equipment. If a single soldier or a small team needed to disable a radar installation, put rounds through a parked aircraft on a forward airstrip, destroy a communications relay, or neutralize a field-stored fuel supply from a distance too great for direct assault, there was no clean answer in the conventional infantry toolkit. The options were a crew-served weapon that required significant logistics to position, or a precision rifle firing a round that was not designed to destroy hardened equipment. Barrett had looked at that space between those two options and produced a solution before the problem had an official name. The armies he approached did not think they needed it. Barrett thought that would change. The rifle he designed addressed a specific mechanical problem that made the entire concept viable. Firing 50 BMG from a bolt-action platform is not sustainable in any practical sense. The recoil energy is severe enough that sustained fire becomes physically punishing within a small number of rounds, cinching degrading accuracy, and making the shooter's ability to stay on target questionable. Barrett built a recoil-operated semi-automatic system with a large double-baffle muzzle brake and a long receiver that spread the recoil impulse across time and mechanical travel. The bolt cycled. The gas bled off through the muzzle brake. The felt recoil dropped to something a trained shooter could manage across multiple rounds without losing position. That semi-automatic system looked excessive and heavy to evaluators who imagined the M82 in a traditional sniper role. It was not designed for that role. It was designed to put multiple large-caliber rounds into equipment that might not be destroyed by a single hit, quickly, repeatedly, from distances where no vehicle-mounted weapon could realistically be placed without significant exposure. The mechanism was the point. Without it, the M82 was an interesting prototype with no practical advantage over a heavy bolt action. With it, it was a platform that had genuinely never existed before. Still, The armies said no. Barrett kept the company alive through other means. Civilian buyers in the United States, a small number of law enforcement agencies, and a limited set of foreign military customers provided enough revenue to stay in production. Sweden became one of the earliest government buyers, adopting the M82 in 1989. Not because Swedish doctrine had a specific established role for it, but because the capability itself was compelling enough to justify acquisition. Meanwhile, the major military establishments that Barrett had originally approached continued to find reasons to defer. The weight objection was genuine. A rifle that approaches 14 kilograms unloaded is a real burden on any infantry unit, and the ammunition it fires is not a cartridge that soldiers carry in useful quantities without dedicated resupply planning. The logistics tale attached to the M82 was long and complicated in ways that a standard 7.62mm precision rifle simply was not. These were not invented objections. They were real constraints. The problem was that the doctrine problem was even more stubborn than the logistics problem. Armies are structured to acquire weapons that fill roles their manuals have already defined. Barrett had a solution. The problem it solved had not yet been officially acknowledged as a problem worth solving. Then the Gulf War changed the calculation entirely. Coalition forces moved into Kuwait and southern Iraq in 1991 and immediately encountered a challenge that had not been fully anticipated at that scale. There was an immense quantity of Iraqi military equipment, armored vehicles, parked aircraft, radar systems, communications infrastructure, ammunition stockpiles, and thousands of mines that needed to be neutralized across distances and terrain conditions where conventional infantry approaches were either insufficient or created unnecessary risk to coalition soldiers. The M82, acquired in larger numbers during the military buildup in the months before the ground offensive, proved to be the right tool for that specific problem in ways that were immediately visible to the people using it. Explosive ordnance disposal teams used it to detonate mines from distances that kept their personnel safe. Soldiers used it to put rounds through aircraft on airstrips that had not been cleared. The anti-materiel mission, the one that had no formal doctrine, no established training pipeline, and no procurement history in most major armies, became one of the most practically valuable capabilities on the ground. The rifle that armies had spent a decade politely declining demonstrated its purpose in the first major conventional conflict after Barrett built it. After the Gulf War, procurement changed. The U.S. military expanded its acquisition. NATO allies followed. Countries that had observed the Gulf War and drawn conclusions about what anti-materiel capability at range could do in conventional operations began placing orders. Within a few years, the Barrett M82 went from a commercially sustained curiosity to a standard inventory item in the militaries of more than 60 nations. The doctrine that had not existed before the war was written after it. Training pipelines were built. The rifle did not change significantly to fit those new institutional structures. The institutions changed to accommodate a rifle that had already been correct for nearly a decade before anyone admitted it. The reputation for extreme range developed alongside that expansion and hardened through 2 decades of combat operations. In Iraq and Afghanistan, confirmed engagements at distances past 1,500 meters accumulated across multiple units and multiple years. The figure most associated with the M82's outer capability, somewhere in the range of 1,800 meters under field conditions, is not a clean laboratory specification. It is a documented outcome from actual operations, dependent on shooter skill, spotter capability, wind reading, ammunition consistency, and the specific target presented. What that distance represents operationally is not simply a ballistics achievement worth noting in a review. It represents the full extension of the concept Barrett built the rifle around. One soldier, or a small 2-man team, capable of affecting materiel and personnel at distances where the enemy's ability to identify the shooter, estimate their position, or mount any meaningful response becomes severely degraded. A force that cannot determine where accurate fire is coming from, cannot estimate how far back the shooter is positioned, and cannot assess which assets are being targeted, operates under pressure that has no clean military answer. The M82 did not create that concept. It made it portable, semi-automatic, and available to infantry units that had never previously had access to it. It is worth being specific about what the anti-materiel role actually means in practice, because the phrase is easy to misread. The M82 was not designed primarily as a counter-personnel weapon, even though it has been used that way, and is lethal at extreme ranges. The core design intent was equipment destruction, radar arrays, parked or lightly protected aircraft, communication vehicles, optical systems, ammunition and fuel and field storage. These are targets where destroying the asset matters more than engaging the personnel around it, and where the asset itself may be hardened enough that smaller calibers produce no meaningful damage. A 50 BMG round fired accurately into a helicopter's engine compartment, an aircraft's avionics bay, or a radar dish produces results that no 7.62mm sniper round can replicate, regardless of shot placement. That distinction between anti-personnel precision fire and anti-materiel capability is what Barrett understood before the armies he approached had formalized it. The M82 is large and heavy because the round it fires is large and heavy, and the round is large and heavy because the targets it was designed to destroy require that level of energy at range. The design has not required reinvention in 4 decades. The M82A1 and the later M107 designation used by U.S. forces are refinements, not redesigns. The folding bipod, the improved carry handle, the rail systems added for modern optics and accessories. These are updates to a platform whose operating principle Barrett established in a Tennessee metal shop before any procurement office issued a requirement for it. Civilian buyers still purchase the M82. Police departments and federal agencies maintain it in their inventories. The military versions deploy across environments as different as Arctic Norway and equatorial jungle. The basic recoil-operated semi-automatic mechanism, the muzzle brake geometry, the fundamental design relationship between the receiver length and the 50 BMG cartridge. These are unchanged because Barrett's original solution was already correct. The rifle looks the way it looks, not because decades of military testing refined it toward that shape, but because one civilian determined the shape it needed to be, and the armies eventually agreed. That is the detail worth sitting with when you see the M82 in footage, in photos, or in the hands of a soldier who looks slightly absurd carrying something that large. The size is not military excess. It is not the result of a program that lost control of its requirements. It is the direct mechanical consequence of what the rifle is designed to do, built to the dimensions that job requires, by someone who had no institutional permission to build it and did it anyway. The civilian origin is not a footnote. It is the explanation. Barrett saw a gap that armies had not formally acknowledged, built the solution at his own cost, absorbed years of rejection, and waited. One war was enough to prove the point. The M82 does not look the way it does, because a committee approved those dimensions. It does not exist because a general issued a requirement. It exists because a photographer in Tennessee looked at a machine gun cartridge and asked a question no defense engineer had been assigned to answer. Why can't one soldier carry this accurately to distance? The armies that said no eventually said yes. The rifle they adopted was the same one they had declined. It had not changed because it did not need to. Barrett had already solved it before anyone was paying attention. If you want to understand why militaries keep making decisions that look wrong until one specific conflict reveals exactly why they were right all along, this channel covers that. Subscribe and you will not miss the next one.